Great. So then, what season are we in? And how would we define that? So this was a picture of Bergen that I took on a walk yesterday. And there are certain signals here that show me that we're in winter, and that give me certain cues for action. So in terms of insolation, the amount of solar radiation the city is getting at the moment, we can see that the days are shorter and that the temperatures are cooler. So there's that. And climatologically, the temperatures are cooler as well, and we're starting to wear warmer clothes. Phenologically, we start to see that the trees are bare. You can see this kind of tree up in the top corner, and there are no more jellyfish left in the ocean for the winter. So they won't be back until summer. At the same time, my body clock is telling me it's winter, which is kind of linking up to Anna's talk. I'm feeling more tired. I'm spending more time in bed. The days are shorter, the nights are longer. Social patterns are telling me it's winter. The city's empty. All the Norwegians have headed up to their mountain cabins and are skiing up there. Of course, all the people who can afford a cabin. So a lot of the immigrant and migrant populations kind of start to take over the city when everyone goes skiing. So, and then of course, there's the semester rhythm. So we're now between semesters. My teaching's not started yet. New students are coming in. So all of these kind of rhythms, these social rhythms, these natural rhythms, they all kind of cluster, they're all categorized together in a category that we call winter, and they're codified in a calendar. So when I look at my calendar and see that it's January and know that we're in Norway, I know that it's winter. I know that in New Zealand, it's summer and everyone's having barbecues and on summer holiday. So January doesn't equal winter, but in Norway it does. And at the same time, there's one signal that's missing from this photo, one clear winter signal that people would use, and that's the snow. Where's the snow? So this time last year, it was -14, and we had a meter of snow throughout the city. And so, of course, this year, the winter is warmer, but this category persists, notwithstanding that there's some of these signals come or go, that there's variability in our seasons. This category somehow persists in the signals that we look for. And at the same time, we're being told that climate change will mean that Bergen in 50 years won't have any more white winters. So also these seasonal categories change. So today I will talk about seasons as cultural frameworks, as categories that are made up of social and natural rhythms, and that they influence how we choose to act at different points of the year. And crucially, here we go. And crucially, that these frameworks are in flux, that they're always changing, and these have implications for our everyday lives. So the question is maybe less, do we live by seasonal frameworks? We emphatically do. But which seasons do we live by? Which seasonal frameworks do we live by? Because they're always changing. And this is important for things like climate and seasonal adaptation, because if we're living by an idea, a belief, or a practice of seasons that is not fitted with the seasons that we're actually facing, then we can be, accused of not really living by the seasons that we're in, as not being very adaptable. So, my name's Scott. I'm a researcher at the University of Bergen here, and I'm looking at these seasonal cultures as resources for adaptation, things that we draw on for knowing what to do when, for anticipating seasons. I'm interested, particularly, all of my work looks at the way knowledge is linked to action in different organizations and institutional spheres, and particularly around climate change and seasonal adaptation. And I'm especially interested in extra scientific, so not formally scientific ways of knowing. I'm thinking of local knowledge, traditional knowledges, but also some of these cultural beliefs that are kind of taken for granted, but pre-consciously steer a lot of what we choose to do. And when it comes to adapting to the seasons, seasonal variability and change, then these cultures play a major role. In fact, like I've said, perhaps the way we adapt to seasons hinges on these cultures. If they're well fitted to the seasons that we're living by, then we're adapting to the seasons, and if they're not, we might not be. So I'm going to quickly go into this and give some glimpses of the seasons in the Botanical Gardens, where I've been doing fieldwork the last year. So the problem is that when the scholars start talking about how we're going to adapt to the seasons, the first thing they think about is how we can connect seasonal forecasts ever more ever more skillful, ever more predictive seasonal forecasts to decision making. So this was a seasonal forecast by the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts for the end of December, the start of January. And this is their seasonal forecast relative to whether the temperatures will be on average warmer or cooler relative to a reference year. But of course, these forecasts, they don't really steer decisions in all of our institutional spheres. Farmers and insurance companies and hydroelectric operators, they don't just make decisions based on scientific information. They also have all of these kind of cultural beliefs and instincts and rhythms and practices and norms, which are kind of cooked in and which they use all the time when they make a decision, often without thinking about it. And that's the problem my work takes up, is how can we get at these cultural frameworks that are kind of doing a lot of heavy lifting that we don't really think about. So I have 3 conceptual starting points. First of all, that seasonal calendars can be studied as cultural frameworks for making sense of ordering different natural and social rhythms over the year. So, of course, you can look at seasons purely climatologically or purely in terms of insolation and the tilting of the Earth's axes, but I'm looking at them as cultural frameworks. And I see them as what Mary Douglas described as kind of buckets. So we take a bunch of really confusing annual cycles and rhythms, a bit like what Anna was talking about, a lot of input, a lot of stimulus, and we kind of group it all together in a category which we call a season. And that kind of helps us make sense of it, and it helps us attribute meaning to it. This part of the year is, if we look at the Yugal-Mungi fire and seasons calendar of the Aborigines in Southeast Arnhem Land and the northern tip of Australia, this is the time when we light our fires, when we do our controlled burning. We don't wait until September, October, because that's when the wildfires come. And we don't wait to the wet season because then it's too wet to start these fires. So we make sense of these rhythms. And what I'm interested in is how these seasonal calendars can be resources that, like I said, help us kind of make meaning of things. Why does this happen? How does it affect our lives? When that happens, what do we do? It coordinates our activities so that, of course, the harvest is coordinated with different parts, different phenological kind of rhythms of when different crops come ripe. It scripts strategies for action, so we know what to do when we're faced with a certain situation without thinking of it. And it helps us anticipate. It's not predictions like the forecast I showed you, but it's an anticipatory technology. So my second point is that seasonal calendars organize society at different scales. So at the global scale, there are seasons actually. And there is this kind of colonializing influence of science. So that you'll see climate science often dividing the year up into 4 seasons. This kind of summer, winter, autumn, spring. But of course, this is a very kind of this is a kind of idea of seasons that's limited to temporal parts of the world, Europe and places like that. In Bangladesh, where I do a lot of work, they have 6 seasons. I know in Papua New Guinea, anthropologists have looked how there's 2 seasons in that place. And arguably in Bergen, where I live now, we have 2 seasons, the dark months and the light months, and the rest of the time it rains. So you have this kind of this colonializing influence of science. And then you have seasons doing a lot of work or structuring life in different places, different societies, different communities, like Bergen here, which is the rainiest city in Europe. And this is kind of the Philharmonic Orchestra posing with umbrellas. Or in our particular jobs, for example, in a greenhouse. And the third thing is that seasonal calendars change over time. They always have. The seasonal rhythms that society has been organized by has always changed over time. So on the left, we have some traditional primstav calendars, over 500 years old in Norway, where they map out religious dates, but they take those dates as kind of cues for different agricultural activities. So, okay, this might be this certain day of the saint, but it's also the time when I harvest my potatoes. And so you'd have these kind of old calendars. And like I say, 2 seasons, summer side, winter side. And we've been on the right trying to create contemporary calendars for Bergen based on symbols that are meaningful for people's lives now. And certain things are similar, Christmas and Easter, they appear in both. But other things like UN Day, the Bergen International Film Festival, and for example, when we change our tires. These are obviously very different moments that are interesting for us. So quickly, let's head to the gardens. I'll take 5 minutes to go through the gardens. Botanical gardens are obviously an institution that's really important. It's a network of different organizations throughout the world, and they're focused on conservation, on research, education, and of course, recreation. And they're really important for adaptation in the sense that we understand and preserve the use of biodiversity and its changes over time. So I want to quickly show how certain global challenges, give some glimpse of how global challenges are changing seasonal rhythms, or what seasons mean within the gardens. And they're doing it in quite surprising ways. So while I thought climate change and biodiversity loss might be seen physically in the landscape, in the different timings of blooming or things like that, actually the way it's changing seasons is through policy and through technology. So very quickly, climate change is recognized by all of the gardeners and the botanists in the gardens as potentially bringing massive changes to the gardens. What plants will flourish and which won't. But actually, most of them don't feel like they're experiencing climate change in the gardens now. But climate change is having a major impact. So there's a new policy that there should be no climate emissions or greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 within the gardens. And so now all of the old emitting technologies have to be replaced by electric chainsaws, electric mowers, you can see there. But of course, this also changes the rhythm of work. So winter is the time when all of the tree work is being done, when trees are felled and things like this. But then it can be -14, like it was, -14 degrees, like it was last winter. And those electric chainsaws can't stand up yet to that kind of temperature, or they're not strong enough, the gardeners tell me. So it's changing what work can be done at different times of the year. And of course, there's some kind of pushback from this. And another thing is, in the top right-hand corner, you've got they're trying to develop new alternatives to kind of polluting things like fertilizer, or the use of peat fertilizer, because we want to leave the carbon in the ground. So you've got gardeners experimenting with creating their own biocarbon, but that's changing everything, because now they will load up the gardens with biocarbon in order that the nutrients leach into the soil, and also to provide a buffer against the damage of the frost over the winter. But that means changing away from the old way they used to do it, which was put these really nice kind of pine fronds over the gardens. And there's a lot of pushback. The public says, but the pine fronds are beautiful, don't put on this bio-coal. And at the same time, the gardeners are pushing back, saying, what's these electric chainsaws? So they have to replace ones when they go defunct. So they're doing everything they can to keep these emitting chainsaws going. They're all held together by duct tape. And these are chainsaws that have been going since the early 90s. And at the same time, I'll finish just in a minute, there's this kind of recognizing that biodiversity loss is a big issue. And there's been shifts in the practice of what they do in the garden. So they've now, instead of cutting the meadows back like they always used to, they let certain of these meadows grow wild, in order that the insects can come back over the spring and the summer, have wildflowers and all of that. But of course, that changes the whole rhythm of work in the gardens, and also ecological rhythms in the garden. So rather than mowing the lawns every month, now they go out there after the season, cut it, so let it grow a meter tall, cut it as though it's going to be hay, and then cart it away using kind of old pitchforks and things like that. And of course, the gardeners are kind of struggling with these new rhythms and new ways of doing things. And at the same time, when I talk to them, they say, well, it's not actually new rhythms. This is what we always used to do. So what seasons are moving the arboretum? Well, the first thing is that there are very specific seasonal patterns in the garden. So we can talk about seasons generally, but typically in whichever activities we're doing, we have specific seasonal patterns. But global challenges are altering these seasonal patterns in the gardens, but particularly through not the changes in the plants or the weather or the climate, but through changes in policy and technology and practices. And that's changing the rhythm of work. It's changing the rhythm of how the trees grow and everything in the gardens. But these calendars are hybrid. So which seasons are we using? Well, it's a bit of both. It's a bit of the old seasonal practices of cutting grass and carrying it away, but it's also new technologies like electric mowers, electric chainsaws, or creating kind of experimenting with biocoal. And these changing calendars are shifting worldviews. So you're going from a garden that was very kind of controlled. It was all about control, having flower beds there, keeping that species there. And now, as the picture kind of shows, they're letting the gardens go wild a bit. You can't spray poison on weeds anymore, so you've got to pull them out by hand. It's a lot more manual. So they've kind of let the gardens go back. But of course, this is contested. And while there are certain people like the botanists or the policymakers or the boss who's kind of bringing in these policy changes and technological changes, you've got the gardeners and the people of the public who are pushing back and saying, we liked the old seasonal rhythms in the gardens. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I'm happy to take any questions, but I know that we're now 4 minutes over time. So
yeah, if you don't mind, Scott, I have one.
Yes, please.
So because I'm actually intrigued by what you said, which is, using this new technology in order to eliminate the let's say the green gas emission or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so people are using now the electric mowers, electric chainsaws, but now I can already foresee, like in 2 years, so we're gonna have a problem, and we're gonna have another problem, which is actual use of those devices, because batteries and particularly lithium are now on the critical raw materials list that was released quite recently, and we have to eliminate using this kind of large battery operated devices. So it's super complicated problem, I see. But it's kind of funny thing to see that not only in your field, but in general, we are tending to go back to the old school ways in a sense.
Absolutely. We're using a lot of these pesticides, insecticides, fertilizers, emitting technologies the last 50 years. And the gardeners kind of talk, especially some of the older gardeners, talk about the old school, which was to just spray everything. And now they're going to change all their practices, but it's a lot harder work. So yeah, you let the gardens go a bit more wild, you change the rhythms of work. Yeah, it's changing a lot the way, it's fundamentally changing worldviews about nature, what nature is, whether we can control it or whether we don't.
I've got a quick question, Scott.
I saw that Lynn had one first, and then you're very welcome.
Yeah, maybe just very briefly, thank you, Scott. That was really fascinating. I was just wondering, can you maybe explain just very, very briefly a bit more about how you actually do your research? Because for me, as a computational physicist, it's just really hard to imagine, because I produce data with my computer, but what exactly do you do to extract this information that you presented?
So I've been working as a gardener every Friday for over a year. So I go out there and I cut grass and I do all the things that the gardeners do. At least I try to. Of course, these guys are professionals, and there's a lot of stuff that I didn't talk about today, that I didn't have time to talk about today. But like I say, I'm really interested in other types of knowledges, other ways of knowing, and I'm really interested in these kind of tacit ways of knowing, which mean ways that we know more than we can tell. That kind of like a potter or how riding a bike, you just know how to do it, you can't explain it. And there's so many other gardeners that will kind of say to me, go and water those plants, and I'm like, okay, so a lot, not very much, no, just the right amount, just the right amount. And then I'll come back over and they go, my God, you've drowned this thing. So there's so much they kind of there's things they let me do and things they don't. But I also spend time with the scientists, with the botanists, so I get to see the different cultures of the different communities. So it's about spending time, it's interviews, it's doing the work, it's just being there, and it's kind of feeling some of these rhythms with your body in some ways. It's you can't, it's one thing, I could go just do a bunch of interviews with people. What does the year look like? What things do you do at the time of year? And then go away. But it's another thing to go back in winter and be working in minus 14, and you have to keep running back into the kind of the car and warming up again, and then going out, cutting down some more trees, or in summer where you just, pruning the roses and beautiful in the sun. I mean, I have to say, it's the best day of my week.
Yeah, it sounds brilliant.
Anna.
Yeah, that was great. I had a quick question about, do you think at any given point in time in a particular geographical location, there can be more than one rhythm? Because clearly, we are a multicultural society. I'm just thinking about London or India for that matter. There are like groups of people who have very different cultures, but they all live alongside in the same place, and they have very different rhythms in terms of what they do at a particular time of year. So multi-rhythms, is that a thing, or is it?
Absolutely a thing. It's all about that. So this is what, what is a lot of the research is about what's changing, like I've said today, what is changing our ways of culturally understanding and practicing seasons. And one of them is, of course, globalization, right? So we are watering down the, I'm not now in Norway in a little community that sees the outside world once a year. There's many nationalities here. I'm from New Zealand, so I bring my ideas of seasons from New Zealand to Bergen. So that is happening. At the same time, you've got this, like I talked about, the globalizing or the colonializing influence of science. There's also the colonializing influence of Hollywood, and you've got a kind of Home Alone Christmas special idea of Christmas. And that travels all over the world. So you have New Zealand, which will be 25, 30 degrees, spray painting snow on their windows at Christmas time to kind of emulate, to kind of copy this kind of idea of this is what Christmas is. It's about snow. Or so, or indeed, when the English or the Europeans moved to New Zealand in the late 1700s, they took with them this 4-season model and imposed it. And the indigenous people, the Maori, said, well, there's 2 seasons. There's not 4 seasons here. Yes, there is. And so then so yes, there's many rhythms that are in phase or completely out of phase.
Yeah, that's yeah. So I don't know if there is a rhythm at all, because there's just so many. It's all mixed up. At any given point in time, it's just a lot of noise, isn't there? In terms of how it all comes together.
Absolutely. I think it's and then of course there are many people. I showed a greenhouse. Do we need seasons if we have greenhouses? Can we manufacture our own seasons? And yet one thing that one of my PhD candidates is finding is that even in fields like in cafes or art studios where they're not dependent on the seasons, the seasons still mean a lot for people. So they'll still choose to dress in a certain way, even though they don't have to, because there's a heater in the car and things. Sorry, Matthew, you have a question, and then I guess we should.
Hello, hi.
Yeah. Hi.
No, this is very interesting, and I was actually thinking from the human response point of view to the season, because I don't know, I'm coming from South Italy, basically, so I have my 4 seasons with a very long summer and spring. And
2.5 seasons, come on.
Yeah, but yeah, enough with winter and autumn. There is winter and autumn, but it's very short. And then I went to Sweden, and in April I was hoping, it's gonna get better now. And then July was a disaster, rain all day. But the problem is, like also my, internal clock was expecting summer. And this summer never came, basically. And the year after, I was so that tired, because it's like...
come back to Anna's talk about it.
Yes, but also, no, it is very related in a sense. Because also it depends also where you were, you grow up, and then your body is used to a certain biorhythm. But this also has an influence, and also I don't know, in research people move a lot, and you change also a lot, kind of landscape, and we don't take into account this at all. And this could be a problem, because I don't know, for me light is never enough. And I really have hard time in waking up, or I don't feel the change. To me, it's always these 2 seasons. But you told me, because I tell him here is 2 seasons, leaf on the trees or no leaves on the trees. That's it. And I miss it so much. So there is an impact on the humans. Is somebody starting this point of view as well? And
absolutely. I mean, it all as soon as you open this box of seasons, it's a huge. There's many different directions you could go in, but certainly another one of the places where I'm doing field work is with climate scientists, so who are doing seasonal forecasting, so who are using that seasonal forecast that I showed you. And of course, maybe this isn't interesting, but I'm finding it incredibly interesting that as I work with these climate scientists who their day job every day is to understand seasons, is that there's no seasonality to their work. They work on data from anywhere in the world, very rarely on Bergen, very rarely on the place where they are. They're doing seasonal forecasts in Eastern Africa or in the polar region. So they're using kind of this data taken from elsewhere, and they're crunching it either in a home office or at in the laboratory. And the only kind of seasonal rhythm to their work that many of them talk about is there's a major European Geoscience conference in May and June, and then another one in the States in November. So these are the two, and then there's a couple of times when there's research proposal calls. So those are the nodes that structure their life. So I think it means that science has departed a long way from, for example, the chemist that Arthur showed earlier today, which was kind of very much hands-on, or that the priest who would go walking in the valley and understand the nature of that place. Now it's kind of, what was this? I can't remember, this British scholar who was talking about people who are somewhere people and people who are anywhere people, and scientists are anywhere people. We don't have a place rooting necessarily.